God's divine nature, essence, and law is love. Considering God's law as the expression and the character of love, we see sin, the breaking of God's law, as an unloving act. I propose that in a loving environment, such as a perfect creation with no sin, all elements of perfection would be an expression of divine love. That would mean experiencing the divine nature, expressions of the divine love, and keeping the divine law. This is the essence, the presence, and the character of the law of love. But what is the opposite of love? This is a question requiring some thought. Most people will immediately declare hate. Hate is the opposite of love. But the reality is, hate is not the opposite of love. Hate is the byproduct of the opposite of love, but it is not the opposite itself. Think a moment of another potential opposite of love. What do you come up with? Some have come up with apathy as the opposite of love. Now, while apathy is a horrible state, apathy is neither a choice of being loving or of being its opposite. It is simply being neither, or I guess you could say being caught in the middle. For instance, think of the lukewarm church. Revelation 3:16 says, "So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth." But if you came up with the word fear, then bravo, you found it. Fear is the opposite of love. You see, when we feel fear, we have taken ourselves away from the presence of divine love, or even love itself. The byproducts of love are hope, joy, trust, and faith. The byproducts of fear are hatred, suspicion, and even skepticism. You see, we are incapable of loving because we are afraid. Please note that when I'm talking about being unloving, I'm talking about our current fallen human love state and the shortcomings that we have when it comes to loving as God loves, or the divine variant. Now, when mankind fell in rebellion to God, and in so doing rebelled against divine love, its essence, its nature, and its law, well, we embraced fearfulness. Fearfulness is the key attribute of a fallen human nature. We have been, and we will be afraid while we remain in our fallen human nature. Genesis 3:10 says, "He answered, I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and so I hid." This is the response of Adam when God came looking for him on the earth. This is the essence, the nature, and the law of sin being made manifest in humans. Think of things that fear creates. Selfishness, or the fear of giving to others to prevent having a lack for yourself. Hatred, a fear of understanding and a fear of the costs of caring for someone. Envy, the fear or of the lack of equality or missing out on something perceived as good for self that someone else has received. Jealousy, the fear of divided attention from an object of affection, and particularly in love relationships, and etc., etc. While fear is the opposite of love, it does not exist in the same capacity as love. Consider darkness, the opposite of light. One cannot use a machine or other power to create darkness. The only thing one can do is remove the presence of light. Fear cannot be created by any other means than by the removal of love. So in the final consideration, the varying degrees by which love is removed equals the variety or the intensity of the fear that sin is manifesting. Sin is to love what darkness is to light. It is measured or present by the removal of divine love. Sin is an expression of missing the loving action. In 1 John chapter 4, the second part of verse 16 through 18 says this: God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God and God in them. And this is how this is how love is made complete among us, so that we will have confidence in the day of judgment. In this world, we are like Jesus. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. When Adam hid, two things were made apparent. He was naked, and he was afraid. In short, Adam was afraid of punishment, and he knew that his nakedness would reveal his rebellion, and so he hid. When thinking of what it means that Adam was naked, there are many theories, but for now it is safe to operate with the assumption that it refers to a change from his previous unfallen condition. This change was either physically or mentally or even both. I believe when God created mankind, he created us non compos mentis. This is the base element of the human character at creation, before mankind fell. Non compos mentis is a Latin phrase for a distracted mind. A distracted mind is a mind that is prone to the innate trait of exploration. Now, even today, in our fallen state, the human being is filled with the desire to explore and to discover. It's one of the driving forces of our character. It's found in pretty much every human being, the desire to explore, to discover, and to learn. Our created design of non compos mentis, coupled with a desire to explore, indicates our role in creation was this discovery of all that is God and all that God has created. The exploration of the essence, nature, and creation of God would have been an eternal adventure in awe-inspired learning. It would be an adventure in discovering everything about love, love's essence, love's nature, and love's character or law. It would be an eternity of discovering of the eternal and all that the eternal has created. Love's essence, love nature, and love's character or law. Because God is love and because God is eternal, this state of non compos mentis discovery would have contributed to an eternity of worship and fellowship with God. Compos mentis is the opposite of non compos mentis. It is the state of having a composed mind. It is to be self-aware and self-concerned. When you compare the two states of mind with free will, non compos mentis would encourage the act of discovery and exploration as a means of fulfillment. In compos mentis, free will encourages one to consider self first before endeavoring to explore and discover. Non compos mentis would be a life of loving without fear. Compos mentis, because it concerns itself with self first, is a life that, when lived, practically is full of fears. Now, these two states of mind are present in varying degrees today, but because we are fallen, non compos mentis is considered base and requiring disciplined thinking. Understanding our state of mind and a state of free will is important to get an idea of how Adam and Eve felt while hiding and why God would later remove his presence from them. Since we were created to love, explore, and dwell with God, the fall at the tree of knowledge of good and evil introduced us to the opposite of love. Fear entered the human experience because of sin. With fear, we suddenly became concerned for ourselves. Becoming self-aware and self-concerned is to have our eyes opened. No longer are we able to explore the infinite, eternal entity of love. Our disobedience to God has caused us to be separated from him. It has caused us to be separated from divine love. And this separation from God is for our own safety, but in separating, it is also a separation from love. And this separation is something that we caused. God separated himself from us for our own safety. You see, we would die from the overwhelming purity of love that is God should we experience it with knowledge that we betrayed it. The very elements of our sympathetic nerve system would not be able to withstand the sheer magnitude of awe and reverence being in his unrestrained and full presence. If we were in his full presence, it would cause our entire body to shut down all activity that allows it to live. In short, we would die from sheer awe and fear. Yes, fear can kill. The use of the word fear here is in light of our fallen state of self-concern and should not be confused with the idea of reverence. Quiescence is the most paradoxical form of terror. With both branches of the autonomic nervous system at full throttle, the organism is both utterly relaxed and completely alert and ready for action. The pupils are dilated, breathing and heart rate rapid. Though paralyzed and capable of voluntary action, it can suddenly spring up to life and flee if the opportunity arises. If quiescence goes on too long, however, heart rate and blood pressure can plunge dramatically, indeed to the point of death. This is Jeff Wise in an article in Psychology Today, talking about how fear can kill. If the fear doesn't immediately kill us, the resulting sense of remorse in God's unbridled presence would. You see, the sense of awe that we would feel would be coupled with the recognition that we chose to reject the source of what causes us to sense the awe, the source of pure divine love. And to recognize that longing for love, the need to discover love, and the hunger that we have for love, it had been ours from creation. But we rejected love and replaced it with fear in the process. In the presence of unbridled love, our sin would produce in us an unbridled remorse, so strong we would literally cry out for destruction to be relieved of our transgression. Revelation 6:15-17 and 9:6 revealed this in the prophecy portion of the book of Revelation, and it says this: Then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and everyone else, both slave and free, hid in caves and among the rocks of the mountains. They called to the mountains and the rocks, Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can withstand it? And during those days, people will seek death, but will not find it. They will long to die, but death will elude them. As Adam and Eve hid in the garden, having rebelled against God, who is the very essence of love, they were filled with fear and remorse. This fear and remorse flooded them with a sense of self-preservation and remorseful guilt. They knew they had to protect themselves at some level, but the best they could come up with was to sew fig leaves together. I propose that God, being all-knowing, would recognize that man had rebelled before his visit and questioning of their whereabouts. In order that he could fulfill his redeeming character, God masked his own unbridled presence to not destroy man with his presence, to give them an opportunity to choose how to deal with their rebellion. God presents himself with a question: Where are you? The choices they could make would be either choosing to ask him for help in fixing their mistake or choosing to justify themselves by blaming others, recusing themselves of any blame and claiming their actions as being right, regardless of exercising their will to rebel against God. In conclusion, mankind in the garden chose to rebel. We chose fear over love by rebelling. We chose self-righteousness over holiness. We chose to be counted among the rebellious that created the conflict in heaven in the first place. In so doing, we fell in with rebels, losing our dominion over earth, our created relationship with God, and our procreative ease to follow God's law. God would have to do something. The law of God in every part was broken on earth in one act of disobedience. The law of love that is described as dominion, the law of love that is described as being fruitful and multiply, and the law of love that helps us to understand how we relate to God, our Creator, as His created. In every part that man fell, God would come to redeem man with a king born of mankind who would be known as God with us.